It's my pleasure to share some of my thoughts as a finance professional, a journey of over 45 years now, starting as a student, an industry professional in consulting, and now in practice. So I've gone through, I've pivoted quite a few times at various stages in my life. The topic that I chose today was an offset of what I see many of us going through. And before I go into it, I usually use 3 slides to do a warm-up for myself. And the first one in that is what you see in the screen as the rear view mirror. I think as professionals, finance professionals in particular, and CFOs, we have been trained and have been to drive to a fair amount looking at the rear view mirror. Our traditional mindset is been rooted in the historical reporting, either the annual or now the quarterly and the budgets and the post-audit outcomes. Inevitably, this is like driving a car. You can miss a couple of steep curves when you're looking too long at the rear view mirror. And corporate history is replete with enough and more examples, starting from probably Kodak on how it missed the opportunities in the emerging digital landscape. Then we had Blockbuster, and many organizations who have lost out opportunities because they were probably too rooted in their past. And that brings me to my slide on the title of the famous book by Marshall Goldsmith, who said, we have been sort of, what got you here won't get you there. Actually, it's more than a pure title to the book, because it reflects a change in the mindset that is required. And there he sort of discusses beautifully on how sometimes our strengths can turn out to be weaknesses in the long term. As finance professionals, we are known to be analytical, detailed-oriented, compliance-oriented. But increasingly, what is required is we are expected to take a lead rather than being more reactive. We need to move away from the perfectionism mindset, risk aversion mindset, and an over-reliance on past data. So the digital landscape is increasingly forcing us to think a little differently than what we have been thinking in the past. And this title of the book, I think, was very apt when it comes to discussing the role of the chartered accountants or CPAs in the times to come. And the third one is this famous statement of Warren Buffett, who made news in the recent past for having stepped down from the role of Berkshire Hathaway just a couple of days back at the he said, only when the tide goes out, you discover who's been swimming naked. Now, I think this, while he might have said this in the context of the stock markets, I think it is reflective of uh, what many corporates go through. I can give a couple of examples, which again may be a little Indian, but I thought was reflective of the global uh, phenomena. Also, was on the post-COVID, uh, when organizations started getting back in late 2021 and early 2022, when they started getting back, and when they found that the shopping levels had gone up significantly, they thought it was sort of a revenge shopping that had come in, and uh, the revenge shopping was mistaken for a change in the buying habits of the people, and it was they had extremely aggressive plans, which led to overstocking, which led to building up of supply chains and so on and so forth. But when the sort of when the after effect of that started waning, what we saw was, at least many corporates in India were saddled with very high inventories. Discounts were all over, and I think some of them are still seeing the effect of that. And what we are experiencing now is, uh, I don't know how many of y'all globally are experiencing, but uh, at least in India, uh, we are experiencing it quite a bit. Is the impact and the influence of the Gen Z and the new millennials on the shopping. It started a couple of maybe a year back, when the regulator was expressing concerns about how the spending habits of the has been changing in India, and which it resulted in even borrowing. People were borrowing to spend, and were even spending monies in speculative activities on the stock markets. And the regulator was expressing concerns whether this was going to cause problems. And that also reflected in the gross savings rates, which India used to have a very reasonably high India's savings rate of about 35%, was now dropping down from its peak of 38, 39. It started dropping down, and it was starting coming down to 31, 32%. And that was also beginning to cause concern in the financial markets. Now, therefore, what we are going to see is that we are going to see a fair amount of inconsistency in the spending habits, the way, like they say, the new generation believes in the uh, YOLO, that is, you only live once, and therefore want to spend. They're willing to uh, they have very limited or uh, brand loyalty. So many things are changing, and quite dramatically. And it is in that context that I uh, started looking at how do we start embracing the and. It's there. I think we have stopped, and we have to move quite far away from the either or scenario. We have to embrace the and, where you have to start looking at, should we go with uh, option A, strategy A, and stop option B. We have to start looking at it, and that's when probably the famous the Amazon strategy of the two-way door and the single door will have to come in. Where the risks are high, you start looking at the single door and two-way doors. And when when the risks are low and you have to take a couple of chances, then you go with the two-door policy where you have to take the risk of moving forward and uh, attempt to look at a couple of options that we have, whether it succeeds or not. Now, I don't know if you, in the recent past, you've seen three very clear shifts that have taken place in the finance world. First one was uh, Fernando Fernandez. The second one was Sridhar, and the third one was, if I'm right, is Robin Washington. Any guesses on what is common in these three people? Fernando Fernandez, uh, Sridhar from India, and Robin Washington. Anyone wants to guess? Take a shot. All three of them were CFOs who were elevated to the role of a CEO. Fernando Fernandez became the CEO of the Unilever, which is going through torrid times globally. And Sridhar again was Sridhar was a more organized one. He took over as the CEO of Saint Gobain in their Asia region operations, consequent to the superannuation of the incumbent Mr. Santanam, which is Fernando Fernandez was replaced the incumbent's Unilever CEO in a boardroom change. Sridhar was a very thought out change, which it was a very structured succession plan. And the third one was Robin Washington. Again, it's quite unique because she was elevated in Salesforce in a new designation called COFO, which is the Chief Operating Officer and Chief Finance Officer. So you're seeing that finance professionals are increasingly being groomed or being seen as people who are fit to take operational roles, either in case of very difficult situations or in cases where it is a well thought out succession plan, or they are even combining one or more than one role into a particular role, which is probably going to be a new normal as far as the corporate world is concerned. Now, therefore, are we seeing the CFO emerging slowly into a role of a digital twin, which is simulating that of a CEO, or probably in a more different environment like India, which is you don't have too many professional organizations, even though we have a lot of listed companies, we have the promoters on the driving seat. So whether they will start becoming the mirror of the promoters who are still having significant stakes in the organization. So we are moving from a reactive to a more predictive type of a role, where we are going to see the CFO playing a more active role in co-creating value or building resilience in the organization, or being a very key persona in the process of the strategic management process. So whether it is in innovation or whether in risk or whether it in growth or be whatever you want to call it, but so you are moving away from the gatekeeper, the control function, the bean counter that we have often been called, into a more uh, proactive, business-oriented function in the times to come. I think that's the first thing that we have to recognize, that we are changing, our roles are changing quite significantly. Again, it is in this background that I thought about the whole thing of how each of us finance professionals are managing stress and sometimes extreme distress in terms of, because of the uncertain future. We need to handle it a little differently, else we will also get relegated to the background of, because today we are seeing that technology has begun to play a very significant role in many things, and the conventional role that the finance professionals have been playing in the past has changed quite dramatically. And therefore, I want to share some thoughts on how this distress is panning out, and as I see it, because I'm going to be, I like to play around on words, and I'm going to, you'll see that in the next couple of slides. The first among this is the disruption. Now, when I discussed this topic with Arun a couple of months back about the changes that are taking place in the financial system, the Trump administration had just taken over. There was the usual noises that was happening, but we saw what happened in the last couple of weeks in terms of what the implications on the stock markets or the capitalization of organizations, on even the threat of a tariff could bear out. The stock markets globally lost about a couple of trillion. Now, this is a reflection of what we, and mind you, we thought that the Russian-Ukrainian war of 2022 was bad. We thought COVID was bad. Now, the last couple of days, we are seeing what it means in the Indian context, with two nuclear powers battling it out, and we don't know what's going to happen. And if there is anything constant in today's world, it's the change. Now, as I said, we are having customers changing. We are having brands that are getting commoditized. We're having the convergence of technology into everything. Then we have, not to speak of the implications of climate and climate change. Now, we also saw how European Union came up with this carbon tax, and how that was seen as a disruption in many areas. We're not to speak of cybersecurity implications and corporate espionage. Now,
and use of technology, sir, in the ongoing war.
Oh yes, you bet, and it looks straight out of maybe some video games. I'm not too sure if it's because with so much of fake news going around, and that could also be a disruption, but in its own ways. One is still trying to figure out if what we are seeing is actually the truth in terms of where the implications of technology. No, like they said, the now they said the future a war is not going to be fought by human beings, and they said the future of war is going to be through water. Now they here we saw that there were video visuals of how water itself is being used as a tool, as a weapon. Now therefore we're looking at everything and anything under the sun that's a potential source of disruption. When I started uh, uh, taking engaged in consulting in quality management in the early 90s, when quality management and ISO 9000, I used to talk about the 3 C's of business, which is customer, competition, and change. And that was my initial fascination with this word C, because and that was not my own. Um, it is one of, again, from one of those books that I read at that particular point of time. Now, the implications of this is getting is a little too high now. And the how countries are going to use probably currency as a tool for for disrupting businesses is again, we don't know what the implications are. The next I want to speak about was on the implications of innovation. Now, we all tend to get strongly rooted in our uh, in what had into our comfort zone, and we think that there is a uh, divide between the academics where they deal with the inventions, and where organizations are corporates are more in commercialization. But ultimately, we have to bear in mind the fact that innovation is invention and commercialization. That is uh, the again that I was talking about, the conjunction of the convergence of innovation and commercialization, and this is getting increasingly reflected in more than one way. Now, if if such of those who have been following in the stock markets in India, uh, 2 days back we had the listing of a company called Aether Technologies. Uh, Now, this is a classic case where uh, it was a company that was incubated at the IIT Research Park. And the IIT Research Park has pocketed a cool 500 million um, Indian rupees, which we refer to as about 50 crores, which I would say is about 6 to 7 million, just as being an incubator, for where they facilitated the commercialization of a technology that had its roots at the IIT Madras. Now, we are going to see a lot more of these in the times to come, and I think that this is a classic case where we will be seeing a lot more of this in the times to come, where we will be seeing the uh, uh, the confluence of technology, collaboration, co-creating of value, all of them are going to play a very, very crucial and significant role in the process, the way corporates start thinking. And that is going to make a big, big difference to the way we have to redefine our strategies, because again, we are going to see a lot of changes in the way corporates are going to think about. Now, I will sort of again share a news item that was I had read in one of the business dailies here, which said one of the Maruti Suzuki, which is one of the largest car manufacturers in India, which has a market share in excess of 50%. They said that the current year, which is the financial year ended March 25, for those who, India has a financial year, which is all corporates follow the same financial year as March. Now, they said they showed a growth of about 3 or 4%. And they said, but for a strategic relationship that they had entered into with Toyota in co-badging a couple of models on their cars, Maruti would have had a flat year, which means we are reaching a situation where we have to start competing with our competitors. Now, that is something that we don't have a choice, but it looks like it's going to become an in thing in the times to come. Now, if that was not enough, again, there was another startup which was funded by a tea major to the extent of about couple of $1 million a couple of months back. Now, that's a collaborative approach where this tea major company, which is a close to 100-year-old company, if it is funding a startup to go into an upstream project in value-added selling, you can understand how the thought process is changing. Now, that's again a reflection of a corporate venture capital mindset, where we will have to start taking those small punts, we cannot be risk averse at all points of times. We will be required to change our thought process because we will be losing out opportunities if we do not take calculated chances on maybe losing out a couple of millions or here or there. That's going to be the in thing. We have to start, they're talking about the 80-20 rule applying a little differently, where they're saying 80% of your turnover has to come from core and 20% has to come from adjacencies. Now, that's a very, they say this is being advocated by consulting organizations like McKinsey. Now, that's a different thought process. Now, if consolidation was not the thing to happen, now organizations are even culling what they started out as something that they diversified into the past. Again, I can give you two recent examples. Again, pardon me if I'm using some of the stories of India, but because I tend to be a little more familiar with the background insofar as that is concerned. Now, Adani, which is again a huge conglomerate in India, recently sold their spectrum to another Indian Airtel company called Airtel. Now, because they wanted to focus on what they wanted, they thought they were more capable on the physical infrastructure that they were focused on. Now, couple of months back, the Aditya Birla Group in India sold close to half a billion dollar business called the Century Pulp and Paper to ITC for close to about again must have been close to about 400 or 500 billion dollars, about 3,500 crores. Now, is that not again a reflection of the thought process that organizations are now wanting to re-strategize and say, I might have diversified in the past, but I now want to focus on areas where my core competencies are more relevant, and I'm willing to collaborate with the others insofar as areas where there are adjacencies and things like that. Now, I remember reading this book of Dr. C.K. Prahalad of 2004, where he said, and the title of the book was The Co-Creating of Value, which was, he brought out a beautiful analogy of saying that earlier, he used a medical analogy where he said a diabetic patient used to go to a doctor who used to send him to a laboratory for investigation, and thereafter they used to go for the insurance companies. They used to recommend that he used to go for exercising and so on and so forth. Maybe the ophthalmologist and things like that. So that but now, and therefore one patient had to go to all these people for solving his problem, and he said that was expected to get inverted, where now many organizations will have to collaborate to serve one customer, and I would think that he was brilliant, because to have said that in 2004-5, to have thought about it, and what we are seeing today is, and again, the other person who said the same thing, Clayton Christensen, who made this brilliant. I read his book, Seeing What's Next, and this is a book of, I must confess, to the 2008 book, which I got to read it maybe last year. But when he about such as those who want to read it must read out only these two sections. One, he said about the semiconductor industry, and again the healthcare industry. I think the man was just brilliant. It appeared as if he had the ability to see what was unfolding in front of him 15 years down the road, because we're just seeing what he saw in 2008 what Intel was going to go through. And believe me, the irony is that when we're talking about Intel and Andy Grover, one of the CEOs is for his again, his statement, only the paranoid survive, could not have become more ironical, because today Intel is fighting for its survival, with the last quarterly results having close to about 700 billion in terms of losses. Now, Nvidia was seen as the replacement to that. Before, NVIDIA was share prices went screaming. It went to $140, $141 a piece, and then the Chinese deep tech came, and the share prices crashed 17-18% in 2 days. Now we saw that in the when we said we saw that in the retail, where we thought that the large format stores were replacing the multi-branded outlets, were replacing the corner store, the large format stores replacing the multi-branded store, the e-commerce replacing the large format store, and now the quick commerce replacing the e-commerce. Now we don't know where these are going to end, but suffice to say that we have to be really agile in our thought process. We cannot have a fixed mindset, non-risk averse fixed mindset. Our strategy will have to change dynamically in the complex worlds that we are dealing with today. What we have to deal with is transformational growth. Now, I again a great fan of the 3M philosophy, corporate philosophy, which said that you have to have, they started at something about 20%. Today, I understand they have as a corporate philosophy, corporate strategy philosophy, whichever you want to call it. They state that you have to have 40% of your turnover coming from products launched in the last 3 to 5 years. Now, that is putting a huge bet and stress on both the marketing and the design teams to understand what does the customer want. Now, you may want to change it. Smaller organizations cannot afford to do it. You may have to think in terms of coming from new geographies, new whichever way you want to call it, but nonetheless, we are looking at a situation where the growth is becoming an imperative. You cannot afford not to look at not having growth. Now, our conventional thought process on incremental budgets are all out of the window. It's all zero based, and we have to get into multiple moves. You can't go into linear moves. And I mentioned about the implications of consolidating and culling of ineffective businesses. Now, you have to get into a corporate learning loop. Now, I think the definition of an illiterate has changed over the last many decades, from the ability to read and write to it became computer literate and computer illiterate, the digital natives and now the inability to unlearn and relearn is becoming an illiterate. What with the implications of, I don't want to flog the artificial intelligence, the generative artificial intelligence, but the impact of all this is going to be too far-fetched. We really don't know how this is going to pan out. Therefore, we need to look at how we can create and be part of ecosystems, which is again becoming the buzzword. How do you own they're talking about the mobility ecosystem, the communications ecosystem, the professional ecosystem, and so on and so forth, where we have to collaborate among ourselves if we have to ensure that we need to survive in the long term. So I don't think today two CFOs or two finance professionals can look at each other and say, no, no, he works for my competitor or he's from a different industry. We have to be exchanging notes. We have to be networking. We have to be having all communications going between ourselves from a long-term perspective if we have to this survive. Now, again, we are seeing the latest disruption that is happening is not through products and processes, but through business models that are changing. What used to be now we and again what they now called as the Uberization of the economy, where owning cars has now become got disrupted because of the Ubers, and we are creating different ecosystems that are which will have a very crucial and relevant role in how we grow in the times to come. So we cannot afford to, we cannot have the ostrich-like approach that Kodak had in the 80s, and we know, as I said, like they say, rest is history. Now, if there is one word that I'm consistently hearing or reading in the books that I'm reading, is this word called resilience. Now, how are corporates going to create resilience within their system, which could be through adequate capitalization? Now, what is, one of the things that I've looked at is many corporates have stopped looking at what we traditionally used to call as the break-even point, which is a function of what your contribution is. Now, organizations are growing, but the break-even points are moving up quite dramatically, which means that any small changes in the economy or the disruption is going to seriously throw a lot of challenges to organizations. Now, we used to think that continuity in businesses was restricted to succession planning, was restricted to people superannuating, but we are now seeing serious problems on this for involuntary exits that are happening. Now, liquidity management, culture. Now you take the situation that we are facing in India about the Pakistan, what it's going to pan out in terms of the supply chains and other things over the next couple of weeks or months. We really don't know what are the implications of this crisis. What are we going to do about capacity management? Now, as I was discussing a couple of minutes back about how Maruti and Suzuki and Toyota shared their capacity in co-badging a couple of their models. Now, would you want to call that strategic? Would you want to call it building better resilience? We don't, like, for instance, I don't know how far it is true, but nonetheless, it's a theoretically a possibility of how these reports that were going around on how Japan was unloading its treasury investments in US treasury bills, or China was doing it, and therefore overnight the 10-year bond yields in US went up from 4.5 to 4.75. Now, those are swings that are having huge implications on the impact that corporates, because exposures corporates have, because they are now exposed to big time in terms of their currencies, borrowings and things like that. And while swings like this can just completely throw costs cost of capital into big problems. Now, what is the implications of the carbon tax that Europe is wanting to levy on its imports? Now, these are all very serious issues that we have to deal with, and we cannot afford to ignore this. And therefore, how we are going to play a major role in building resilience into the organization is going to be another very critical factor. Now, the next one is execution. Now, like Henry Ford has famously said, strategy without execution is hallucination. Now, what we are seeing is how we have to bring about continuity, how we have to bring perfection into our system, how we have to ensure quality. All of this is as a very serious role to play in the process. Now, in terms of cost management, also execution is going to be a very crucial role to play, because even a couple of basis points on execution can lead to serious problems in the long term. Now, therefore, execution is going to play a very crucial role in the process. Now, stakeholder management. Earlier, we were dealing with only the investors. Now we are dealing with regulators. We are dealing with the debt we are dealing with. We are dealing with the social media. We are dealing with country risks in terms of what are the implications of. So we have to deal with multiple stakeholders at the same point of time. Now, therefore, we are talking of a complete change in our thought process from in terms of our commitments to our stakeholders, be it the employees, be it the creditors, be it the supply chain, we have to collaborate with all of them. And in addition to that, we have these changes that are coming in because of ESG implications and things like that. Now, typically what Europe has said is, okay, instead of carbon tax, you can levy the tax and then you can do it. Now, what is the climate change finance will have an implication? We don't know. They are talking of already the impact of climate change will require about $5 to $8 trillion as against what is currently having at about $800 billion. And they say the inflection point will be when it crosses $1 trillion, and we are not too far away from that. So therefore ESG financing, climate financing for innovation, for transition to phase out. What are the implications? How are we going to deal with it? These before we know what's going to happen, it's going to be staring at our doorstep, and then we can't be doing it. Compliance is taken for granted. Nobody is talking to, it is like quality. Nobody is talking too much in terms of quality. It's taken for granted. Credibility issues, reputation, all these are going to become very serious issues. And finally, finance professionals have to move away from just dealing with numbers. We have to start building the story around the numbers, which has means we have to master the art of communication with clarity, with a fair amount of creativity, and therefore with credibility. Now, we have to get into the art and science of storytelling, because that is going to be the way we will be in a position to uh, retain the attention of the next generations, which are having limited attention spans. So where are we? Where are we dealing? We are dealing with, therefore, the distress is disruption, innovation, strategy, transformational growth, the need for resilience, the need for execution, the need for stakeholder management, and the need for storytelling. Distress will have to be replaced with eustress, which is positive energy. Now, that is where we have to really start looking internally and say, how do we start creating this eustress, moving away from this distress or stress or distress, and how do we create this eustress as the next point of for us to focus on. Honestly, I wanted to say, looking ahead, how do we start dealing with the issues? But when I was looking at ways and means to end this talk, and then I realized how naive and foolhardy I would look like by trying to even uh, want to say how do we look ahead, because I found this quote which is even more relevant. If you don't create the future you want, you must endure the future you get. And therefore, my friends, I want to say, open the door for some exchange of thoughts on how you are seeing this situation pan out. I would probably hear from you on what uh, are the ways in which we are going to deal with the various facets that I mentioned about the distress, and how do we create eustress out of this situation.